Hello, everybody, and welcome to the seventh ModelShare workshop, a series aimed at developing good practices and recommendations for improving metadata in computational model sharing and publishing platforms. The workshops have been led by the Certification Working Group at the Open Modeling Foundation and supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. In the coming weeks, we will be inviting members of the Open Modeling Foundation's community who have signed up to our Google group to review a paper with all of the reflections and findings based on these past 7 workshops. So I hope that those on this call will join. In today's session, we will hear from 3 fantastic speakers. We'll begin with Chris Erdmann, the co-chair of the Open Modeling Foundation's Certification Working Group. We'll then hear from Simon Hettrick, Director of Strategy at the Software Sustainability Institute and a Director of the Southampton Research Software Group. Last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Natalie Meyers, the professor of the practice at the Lucy Family Institute for Data and Society at the University of Notre and a computational and data science research specialist for the Research Data Service at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. Without further ado, and if you do want to expand on your own introduction, please do. I will hand over to Chris. Chris, if we can keep it under 15 minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, and thanks, Ishmael. I don't think I've ever been called a fantastic speaker, so that would be great. It was a great introduction. But I'm Chris Erdmann. I'm the head of open science at the Scilife lab, which is research data infrastructure for the life sciences in Sweden. And I come at this topic at sort of an angle of a systems view, and particularly from the open science side of things, because, hey, that's my title, right? And so, it's a challenging topic, though, because you can come at this from, some other angles, too, as far as, assessing the value of a model. So I'll try to do my best, and then, I'll hand it over to the others. But to start, I thought it would be good to go back to basics, or where we started in the Open Modeling Foundation, and reference this paper that was written by the group a while back on how to make models more useful. I thought it was a great place to start, which is, some of these things are the typical challenges that we hear, which is researchers sort of pointing to the lack of credit recognition for the work of making these models, particularly around software, sharing it and making it more accessible and publishing it, and the time it takes to do that. We're very much still paper or journal article based in credit schemes. And then, the other aspect to this was the need for standards and institutional incentives, recognition, rewards, and stakeholder involvement from different aspects like publishers and funders. So, these sort of challenges and these needs kind of ended up, although it started forming before this, but the Open Modeling Foundation was kind of based on some of these. And in that paper, they sort of made these charges, these actions of saying, we should look to publications to make source code accessible and understandable and runnable. That we should this work for cleaning and commenting code and depositing in archives and making it usable via documentation, packaging, APIs is should be something we should work towards. Digital badging, code evaluation, standards code, citation metadata, also sort of the educational materials and ethical practices around this, and influence the evaluation and career advancement process, so that people can get credit for this work. So this was really the sort of background, and some of these things sort of build off of here. But I think one of the other sort of background places to look is another community, that's sort of grappling at this from a different angle as well, is the Research Data Alliance Fair for AML, and they're building off of the software principle. So this is a group that I was working in, where we sort of also developed recommendations and ways of looking at how we can make research software more fair. And then they're building off of that and defining what fair means for machine learning. They talk about sort of the similar aspects of metadata, what sort of metadata is needed, sort of linked data aspects. Like there's a lot of sort of relationships, connections to be made in publishing models. Like they mentioned some of these things like the training data and the model cards. And an important sort of I think things that's being used in this sense across different disciplines is schema.org. You see it used in different domains. And then the sort of stakeholders involved, right? Because you have pieces of information coming from different places like Hugging Face and GitHub and archive, preprint server, and so you have to sort of aggregate all this information to make a more complete representation of what is included in a model. But there's more information. This is a quick summary, but I urge you to go and look at their most recent YouTube recording about their discussions, and they represent themselves best in this scenario. Another place we sort of build off of is in the Open Modeling Foundation. We have this example, that actually the lead of the chair of the Open Modeling Foundation, Michael Barton, is part of this project, and actually other members of the group are part of this .NET project, which is, looking at sort of how we bridge all this, right? How we aggregate all this information about what's needed in model sharing. And it's interesting because they're sort of grappling with this challenge, right, of how we acted for many years as a research community. So the first journal articles came out in the 1600s, and they basically haven't changed for the most part, right? And where we're trying to move, where you can see in some of the metadata that they're trying to incorporate, that this is part of this linked data world, this knowledge graph that we have to sort of exploit and do more with, and really, sort of innovate and break free of the challenges that, that the current publication structure has us in. So I thought it was good also, I have the challenge of bridging this, right? Like the sort of current methods of how we do things versus like where we want to maybe go. And I had the opportunity to talk to an editor I used to work with, Stephen Griffey's, at the James modeling journal in the AGU, the American Geophysical Union. And he's very forward thinking too. Like, how can we do more? How can we be more open as a community? It's really a pleasure always talking to him. And, he talked about some of these things, about these challenges around proprietary software, and then trying to work with these communities, which we worked with together on, there's sort of climate modeling communities, or I think the one example we grappled with together was the weather modeling facilities in Europe and other places where, the challenge is maybe not sharing they're sharing the code in their communities and you have to become a member, but sharing it outside of that is a challenge. And so they stand out as one of the groups that's not sharing in the journal. And so we tried to work with them on what could you do to start some progress. And the irony is, they said, we can share some snippets and pieces of code. And if you're following recent news, the AlphaFold news about how they didn't share their code is really out there right now, as far as a pressing example of, well, sharing the snippets of code and examples of code wasn't really sufficient. And I haven't been able to look at it further, but I think there's some funny examples in the comment of the code there that they're sharing. But one of the other things we discussed, which was interesting, was this community statement initiative to really bring community together to think about how, how they could sort of try to find middle ground about sharing what needs to be shared in models, and, at least having a common ground where people can start, doing this, where we think about the weather facilities and other places. And then, this is something that journals are doing already, but these data software sharing availability statements is a start, and citing these outputs is a start. But it's we still have ways to go because really community norms kick in, and how much time the journals have to look for these things, and really do they actually look at it, or are they just doing this in name? And we still have low percentages. I think a good example is PLOS, PLOS Biology, that really shares a great deal of code in their community, and they believe in this. And then finding ways to streamline review and execution of the code. It's really challenging to do this at scale sometimes, right? Like you could be using models could be running on multiple facilities, as far as pipelines go, and software and other data being in different places, and collaboration being across the place. So how do you make that open when it's like very difficult to scale and give people access to those facilities? So these are some of the interesting things I thought I'd bring up as far as background too. Again, I think about this from the systems view and what's happening around open science. There's a lot of momentum around open science indicators, from countries like France, and Ireland, and these indicators. Some way you can see it as like, well, as a researcher, oh no, they're starting to evaluate me on different things, but at the same time they're really kind of moving us forward as far as transparency, because I think that researchers can now finally see, what do I need to do as far as share? How can I be a better researcher? I don't want to not be seen in these facilities for sharing open science. And so PLOS is kind of, again, really has some great examples here, and they've incorporated these badges, which ultimately can be maybe dynamic, where you can actually filter and say, you know what, I don't want to see all the papers that don't share data on software. And that could be something good for our community moving forward, and also that, plays into what we need as far as helping with sharing our models, like the aggregated information. Another example I like is papers with code, where, again, they're sort of trapped in the traditional model of trying to parse papers for information to make them more dynamic, and so they try to link GitHub with the papers and other associated information. The lucky part of this is that most of the preprints that they're scraping are open and in the and archive. So at least that's a start, right? Like, one of the first places to start is we need open papers. we need the ability to mine, because we're still kind of trapped in this mode. And so yeah, I share the metadata because I'm trying to also share with you what are the pieces of metadata components that we need to link together, like as far as what needs to be shared as far as model sharing. And then another example is Hugging Face. And like, this is of course a really popular platform for sharing models these days. And they're also trying to aggregate all this information. And what I think is interesting about Hugging Face is their really their firm belief in and trying to capture as much information as possible in the model cards. These model cards are extremely detailed, and what makes it beneficial for Hugging Face is they have a librarian, a digital librarian that goes through and checks all the sort of metadata and creates bots to help their users to fill out these model cards. But I think, where they're headed in the future is to try and do more with those model cards and make, again, help their system and all the filtering, and, help with the sort of dynamic capabilities. But again, I'm sharing all the metadata that might be needed to, link in here. And I share a YouTube link to actually the librarian at Hugging Face that gave a talk on what they do as far as open science and FAIR. And how they think about it at Hugging Face, and it is kind of baked into what they believe in open science. So that's nice, to hear. So this is a model care, just like a snapshot, but you can see on the left they actually ask so many questions, and the good news is they actually have bots to help with this, right? But they do have required fields, and you can see just some of the things that they're collecting as well, and some of the things that we need to incorporate into the metadata, sort of the linked data that we need to take advantage of in sharing the models. And one last example is OpenML. I thought there were just some other pieces of metadata that were useful here, like benchmarks and measures. But You know, I think again, like we need to look at how we, you know, we can link all this information. But one of the other things that's been mentioned on this call is think about an MVP, right? Like we can't do everything. And another example project that is helpful in this sense is that when people were started sharing metadata through their repositories in DataSite, they had a very simple schema to start with. And in a similar fashion, that's a way to go, you know, think of similarly for what we're trying to do, as well as thinking about a simple schema. And there are models available in DataSite already. We actually saw that Hugging Face models are available through their DataSite Commons. So I kind of close with this because I just showed you a bunch of all these links, all these pieces of metadata that are extremely difficult to sort of track and curate and link together. And I used to work for a funder where we had a very advanced open science policy, and we saw, you know, the researchers that were funded were sharing a lot of their outputs. And we got to a point of like, what do we do with all these outputs? They're not linked together. It's difficult to get some further meaning about how, as funders, we can, you know, sort of advance science and do more as far as discovery. And so one of the places I like, and it's the concept maybe, you know, because you know, I'm part of the group is trying to launch this activity identifier called RAID. But I really like the concept, the idea of linking all these objects, all these outputs together to form more meaning out of it. And I feel like it will also sort of change our perspective on the research process once it's started and being more integrated. Is that, you know, we will finally maybe just be able to start realizing the potential of all this other additional linked data, and you know, sort of leveraging the additional information that's trapped in papers in a new and informative way, to you know, help with collaborations. And so that's everything in a nutshell for my talk. I will hand it over to Simon, unless we want to take one question, but I think we want to flow on, right, and take the questions afterwards. So I will cede the floor.
Okay, thank you for that. I will attempt to share my slides. I look okay?
Looking good, thank you.
Okay, so whereas Chris was talking about a specific example of, you know, the way that we recognize research outputs and the way that we share them and the benefits that can come from that, I'm going to be talking about the hidden ref, and that is a UK-based campaign to try and get us to change the way we think about research outputs overall. The idea is to celebrate everyone that makes research possible. So if you if you don't know, if you remember nothing else about this presentation, then I want you to remember this slide, because this is the entire purpose. This is why we're doing this work. And it's we believe that if we don't recognize the people who are vital to research, we limit our ability to conduct research. Now, I feel like my entire career has been based on putting blindingly obvious things on slides that other people don't seem to share that opinion for some reason. This is one of them. So I want to give you a case study, an example of why I came to this conclusion. And that starts with the Software Sustainability Institute. I won't spend a huge amount of time on this because I feel that a lot of people will already be aware of the fact that we have this institute in the UK. We're about supporting better software because we think better software leads to better research. Back in 2014, we were having to explain our existence to our funders so that we could get continued funding. Nobody at that time had sort of looked into how much software was in the research domain. So we did the first study back in 2014, 15 Russell Group universities, so research-intensive universities. We got these numbers out of a survey that we ran. I won't go into a huge amount of detail here, but basically 92% of researchers from all backgrounds were using software, and 69% said it was fundamental to the generation of results. So this is really important. But the big question then was like, well, who's writing all the software? Because there isn't a software developer role within academia at that time. So we looked into this, we ran a workshop, we came up with the name Research Software Engineer, and then I ran a campaign starting in 2013 to get that recognized, and it's now all around the world. So the thing that happened from this was these people already existed. They were already there in the academic environment, and we gave them a name, and we sort of campaigned to get them to rally around that idea, so they could start to get a career path and some sustainability for those people. And what came out of that for me was just suddenly we had massively increased the access to skills that could be used in research, and that was leading to better research. If you were a researcher, there was no way on earth you were going to be able to bring into your research group the range of skills that you could get by tapping into these research software engineers, and especially into the research software engineering groups that came about after the recognition for the role had been established. And that meant you had much greater access to skills. It meant you could do better research. And I wanted to do more of that. I wanted to look into all of the other skills that were missing, and then look into why we weren't already sustaining them. And that brought me to one of the big questions in life, and that is like, why are we here? So philosophers have been sort of puzzled by this for a long time, but they've overlooked one group who have had it answered for a long time. And according to Chris, around about 350 years, they've had it answered. Academics. Academics exist to amass publications. That is the reason for their existence. And that's fine. Publications are a really important part of the research process. They're a very important part of the agreement that we as researchers enter into with the taxpayers who fund our research. But what's happened is we've started to use publications as this proxy for what success means in conducting research. I wanted to look into that. And in the UK, and not everybody will be aware of this, we have something called the Research Excellence Framework. So sounds dull, it is. And it takes place every 7 years. And what we do is we assess the research output coming out of all universities. It's a hugely expensive endeavor to go through. But the reason that universities do it, and the reason that they take it very, very seriously indeed, is there's a lot of billions of pounds of research funding is dispersed on the back of the results that you get in the ref. So I thought, well, here's an interesting thing. Let's look into how the research community is evaluating what it means to be successful in research, because maybe there's something about software. As a research software engineer myself, I'd never been involved in this. This was an academic thing. So back in 2020, I started looking into it. And I found that there were 21 different categories of outputs that you could submit. And that was fantastic news, because if you look in digital artifacts, category G, software. This thing was running in 2021. It ran in 2014. It also ran in 2008. Slightly under a slightly different name, and there's small changes, but mainly the same thing. So this was hugely important to me. I could look into the data. I could find out what software was seen as being successful, what groups were producing that software, how it was being assessed. There was just so much research that we could do on the back of the data that I'd be able to get from the ref process. And the ref's a government-run endeavor, so it's all open data. Amazing. First things first, let's plot the data. Let's look at the outputs that have been submitted, and here we go. And those of you with keen eyes might notice a slight skew in this data set. And that is that basically it's all publications. So 21 categories of output that you can submit, and everything goes into publications. It started off high. It's 97.8% in the RAE in 2008, and it's got higher every time. So at the last ref, only 2.4% of outputs were used to exhibit the success of everything else that is involved in research that wasn't publications. If you want to put a figure on that, 186,000 outputs were submitted. If you want to have a guess on the number of software ones, 11. So I don't feel that this is representative of the work that's going on in research, and I think there's a big problem with it. And that's the problem. I'm going to describe that problem with what I'll call the Venn of academic importance and recognition. So we've got the people who are vital to research. We can't do research without these people. And we've also got people who are named in publications. And now you've got to remember the people who are named in publications, we basically say are the ones who contribute to the success of the research. Whack bang in the middle, academics, sitting pretty. They're happily in both sections. The problem is everybody else is in this blue section. So it's not just research software engineers, it's technicians and librarians, data stewards, and literally every single field I'm working now. I come across more and more of these roles that we call hidden roles. So vital to the conduct of research, almost entirely unrecognized by the organizations with which they work. So when we stop recording, maybe we can start talking about who fits in that side of the Venn diagram. I'm not going to go into details on that. Okay, so I wanted to change the way that we look at what success means in research, and the way I did that was just by running a competition. Let's take the REF. It's a process that's very well established in the UK, and it's unique in the sense that it's hated by everybody, even the people that it supports. So it's a perfect foil for a campaign. And what we'll do is we'll call it the hidden REF, this competition, and we will focus only on the outputs that aren't publications. You can submit anything you want, as long as it's not a publication. But that's not quite enough. We went to because we don't know whether that's or everything that's important to research. We went to the community and we asked them, suggest some new categories, and then they suggested lots of new categories and really important stuff like training materials, citizen science, community building, and set up this massive research software engineering community. Nobody was recognizing it. I definitely felt the community building one. But the other thing that people kept submitting was people. And it was really surprising. Like, people kept writing in and saying, well, I'd like to submit this technician. I'd like to put in this research manager, or any number of other roles. A lot of roles so far, it turns out. So eventually we thought, well, we're meant to be focusing on outputs, but let's add this hidden role category, because these people need recognition, and maybe we can do something about that. And it's been phenomenally successful. We've now got 21 supporter organizations. All of these organizations represent usually either research itself or a group of people within research. And now the Hidden Ref sort of acts as an umbrella over this group, and we campaign on behalf of all of these different roles that these organizations support. And then back in 2020, we had our first competition. 120 submissions from more than 60 different universities, and the hidden role was by far the most popular part of that competition, and that was fantastic. It was really great to see people getting recognition for work that they had been doing that everybody required, but they hadn't been recognized for. And over time, what we found was that it started building, and now suddenly, accidentally, this idea was to run a one-off competition, and suddenly we're running a campaign. So we are setting up properly as a campaign now. There's a Slack community that you can join if you're interested. I'll share the slides, and you'll be able to follow that link. And before I go into my final couple of slides, I just want to say that this is a volunteer-led campaign. So this is the committee. We're all putting our time towards this without it being part of the day job, and it's because we really want to see change, because we think that change will be a very positive, have a very positive impact on research. There's a competition again this year, but it's for UK only. Sorry about that. But if anybody wants to do a US version or another European version, then I will happily support it. So if I've got time, I can just do 2 last slides. First of all, what I want to say is things like this, you sort of feel like, well, bringing the community together and getting everybody lobbying. What kind of impact does that have? Well, it has a really significant impact. The next REF will now include submissions by any staff members, including non-academic staff, and that was from the back of our lobbying. So this is the national research assessment juggernaut of a program has had its direction changed by the campaign that we've been doing. So now what we're focusing on is something we call the 5% manifesto, and this is where we are asking universities to sign up to submit at least 5% of their research outputs into what we call non-traditional output categories. That's not publications. And I can talk about the interesting discussions that are happening on the back of that. 5% seems really small. It's twice as double what they're currently submitting. That's why we chose it. So finally, just to say, the reason that we're doing this is the opposite of my opening slide, because we believe if we recognize the people who are vital to research, then we increase our ability to conduct research. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for keeping within the 15 minutes. I do deeply appreciate that. Natalie, in the hopes that I could repeat keeping within 15 minutes, thank you. Natalie, if you can share screen and go ahead with your presentation now.
Coming right up. Hopefully everybody can see that. What I'd like to share with you today is a talk about model assessment, how we consider, plan, implement, and explain, particularly artificial intelligence impact assessment, or what you might hear acronymed as AIIA. We'll be talking about model assessment in a landscape of risk mitigation and heightened expectations of ROI in AI. What are the context points for my thoughts on AIIA? Primarily, the preparation I've done as an instructor for a FISCI class we started running last year on good governance for AI and scientific publications. That course offers a global perspective on developing effective governance policies for AI in scientific research, with a focus on appreciating not only broad international context, but also examining regional and local contexts for science publications. It aims to foster an understanding of how international standards can be created while considering regional and national differences in approaches to ethical, reliable, and integrity AI practices in scientific publications. We'll be teaching that course again this year under a slightly different name, and I encourage you to participate. It will be offered both in person in Los Angeles, but also virtually in 3 different time zones across the globe. The other place my thinking comes from that I have to emphasize is the European Open Science Cloud Future Project and the Research Data Alliance Artificial Intelligence and Data Visitation Working Group. EASC Future asked our working group to create some deliverables related to secure processing environments for open science, and we've proposed several legal foundations for such processing environments, to prepare guidance for informed consent in the context of AI and data visitation, to prepare guidance for ethics committees reviewing AI and DV, and to prepare an AI Bill of Rights recommendation for the EASC Future Project and the membership of the Research Data Alliance. So this was a big ask. These deliverables are all in review right now, and I invite you to stay tuned. They should be released for the RDA's consideration in the next weeks ahead. But as I speak, these are the places we're coming from when we think about AI assessment. So what might be the priorities for a responsible AI strategy? The below elements you see on the screen are those that we recognize as essential for any group, organization, company, university, hospital, jurisdiction. You'll notice that AI impact assessment is clear down here. If it were a numbered list, this would be number 4. What we notice there is that AI impact assessment is number 4 on the list, but depends on earlier elements, including setting policies, determining your oversight strategy, and providing training to those that will be on your strategy committees and your oversight boards. Without that, your AI impact assessment will fall flat. And you'll notice there are later elements, including monitoring, transparency notice, and disclosure processes, making sure you do vendor due diligence about whether what you're attempting to assess is even possible on the vendor solutions you're using, and conducting testing for bias. Impact assessment is a endeavor that we must determine what will be the AI system impact assessment process, where a group has to get together and decide what's our process going to look like and why. you have to include a strategy for your documentation of AI system impact assessments. In other words, what are you going to record and how are you going to make that transparent later if you need to? You need a method for assessing the AI system impact on individuals as well as groups of individuals, and a method for assessing societal impacts of AI systems. These can be bigger impacts than just the impacts on particular groups through bias, and this is important to understand because a hallucinating AI model could have a large impact on society, but also still be a biased AI as well. So when we do impact assessment, we have to take both those scenarios or the full spectrum into consideration and focus on what's possible with the compute resources, the people, the time, and the money we have, and then create a schedule of AI system impact assessment that our organization agrees we can hold to, afford, and conduct on a periodic basis. Here's a sample flow chart for applying an AI-IA from an organizational perspective. This is from a relatively recent systematic review of artificial intelligence impact assessments that I encourage you to visit in Artificial Intelligence Review. I think it's helpful because it shows us in a what next scenario, all the things we might encounter along the way if we apply such a strategy to the way we do assessment. And the systematic review considers many other avenues as well. This is a kind of conglomeration of all of the kinds of impact assessment process strategies that they saw in literature. So if you're going to do AI impact assessment, one of the most important things to take into consideration is AI alignment. If you're not familiar with that term, which primarily comes out of the legal compliance community, it's that AI alignment is a safety research process that aims to ensure that your AI systems achieve their desired outcomes, and that any group creating or implementing an AI policy should consider audible detection for bias. We referred to that a little bit before, but here we see it defined as a way to expose cases where the decision logic of your AI is in violation of your previously agreed upon ethics. In other words, you needed that ethics oversight committee in place first to know what your bias detection is looking for. You need to consider auditable detection for privacy violations. This is where your decision logic is in violation of agreed upon ethics ensuring privacy. In other words, maybe you mined something you shouldn't have or trained against less than you should have. So there are a number of ways that you might use auditable detection for privacy violations to uncover ways that the way your training models do or don't fit with your AI assessment strategy. And finally, it's really important to have a control and escalation process to assign responsibility for investigation. And a process for that investigation. How will you notify people and disclose violations? What will your process be for reconciliation and restitution to impacted individuals and groups that will mitigate and correct the consequences of a non-aligned AI? So when we do AI impact assessment, one of the things that we're really testing is our AI alignment strategy and what we've agreed upon that we'll do when we find things in our impact assessment that we need to take further action on, especially when there are harmed individuals or groups. And finally, I want to leave all of you with the conversational opportunity to consider how AI governance can be approached from either a human rights, risk-based, or safety-based motivation, or sometimes a combination of all three. So far, most jurisdictions and organizations regulate artificial and general intelligence based on risks. risks that the models may give rise to during their development, deployment, or dissemination. Yet, as Kangalanesi argues, risk-based regulation, like regulatory excellence more generally, is not merely a technical enterprise. It requires technical competence, but also principled decision-making, transparency, and careful attention to empirical evidence and on-the-ground implementation. That's what we got at when we thought before about what should the periodicity be? What should the disclosure process be? And in that context, the application of AI raises fundamental questions regarding human rights. At most, risk assessments inform regulators' decisions. They don't provide the basis for them. Risk assessment provides scientific or empirical answers about probabilities, hazards, and their distribution. It doesn't supply the policy principles themselves or the normative reasons that are needed to make regulatory or risk management decisions about these hazards or to mitigate them. So this is why impact assessment is like a ball of yarn that when you start pulling on it, you need way more hands to keep doing the pulling. And that means you need that group we talked about before, the oversight committee, the planning committee, but also those who know it's their job to escalate and who know it's their job to inform and mitigate any situations that you become aware of during impact assessment for AI. So I thank you all so much for listening to those observations about AI and model impact assessment. And I hope we can talk about that in the moments we have left. And I encourage you to visit these sites and take a look at that systematic review and some of these other resources, because this is our future. This is what people we're working with are going to be spending their time on. Thanks so much.